Morning, everybody. The Simple Handicap for Thursday, November 7th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. Appreciate everybody who had the time yesterday to stop by the YouTube live stream, dove into all of the Week 10 games. Win again, 90 minutes. You get me talking downhill. I'm a little bit hard to stop, and so we got a good preview in yesterday. Gave my thoughts on a lot of sides, and let's recap everything that we have seen in the last 24 hours, as well as talk about a bevy of injuries across the league and get you on your way this Thursday morning in the Market Rundown. NFL Week number 10 kicks off tonight with the Cincinnati Bengals on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. Looking at the Ravens as a consensus 6-point favorite across the board, with the total up to a new high in the market, 53.5, nearing territory of being the highest Thursday night football total ever. We've seen a 60. Believe it or not, we've seen a few 56s, 54. Very rare territory for the total. T. Higgins listed as doubtful. That is usually a 95% indication that he is not going to be able to go. Keaton Mitchell, who we talked about on the anytime touchdown scorer market at 5-1, listed as questionable. That's the big note for the Baltimore Ravens, potentially including him back in the offense for this game. Other than that, not a whole lot has changed. The Lamar Jackson news of missing practice was downplayed by Harbaugh at the presser. Might be something we see going forward every week as he gets into this point of the season. You never really know, but it wasn't labeled as a concern. Haven't seen a lot of movement on the side in this game in the last 24 hours. But as mentioned, money continues to come in on the over in this game. As we get to Sunday and we're looking at the Germany game in Munich, it is the New York Giants out. Money keeps on coming in. 6.5-point favorite now across the board as another wave of money yesterday pushed this side up even further. Another half-point move in favor of the Giants. There was some interesting commentary on the Panthers side about Adam Thielen. We heard from the GM yesterday at a presser. He spoke about Thielen's role in the offense and elevating the younger guys and said we hope to have him out on the field soon. Was nothing specifying this week, kind of mirroring the comments we heard from Dave Canales earlier in the week, not necessarily pushing towards him being back on the field in this game. On the Giants side, we'll see if Slayton travels with the team later today. That could be an injury news note worth monitoring for the Giants side, is potentially taking out a receiver. That would probably boost the status of Neighbors from a prop value standpoint in this game. We'll see how that is treated. Jonathan Brooks practiced in full, could potentially make his debut for the Panthers. Other injury news of note, looking at a lot of rest DNPs for the Panthers. DJ Wanham got in a full practice. That would be a boost to the defense, certainly if he is able to go in this game. So nothing too groundbreaking, but again, I mean, there's something at play here, and I'm not implying fixed, I'm not implying suspicion, but there is something known about this matchup that I just don't know about as this number continues to get bet up on the Giants, like someone out there knows the final score of this game. And so it's a puzzling line to me that I don't have the answer for, someone else does, and I mean, we continue to see the Giants get bet and bet and bet every single day. Buffalo on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. Soft fours. Now the number across the board for Buffalo. I wouldn't be too surprised if we see this get to Colts 3.5 as we see Keon Coleman dealing with the injury that he suffered last week against the Dolphins. There was a comment from Sean McDermott that implied that this is going to be a multi-week injury. Amari Cooper was back at practice which is a nice boost, but still the role that Coleman was taking on was quite impactful. I think we see the Colts able to force the Bills into another short conservative passing game, which might encourage a little bit more run from the Bills. But without Coleman on the field, that's certainly a blow to the offense. On the Colts side, Ryan Kelly at center placed on IR. He is going to be lost for at least 4 weeks, potentially more going forward. A big blow for the Colts up front on the offensive line. The fours continue to get a little bit softer as we see Colts money come in over the last 24 to 46 hours, but the total has taken a big U-turn. We're now up to 48 across the board from a low of 45.5 on Tuesday. Minnesota on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. CJ Beathard was elevated from the Dolphins practice squad. I missed that note and how that happened, but that was the official report as the Jags in the presser yesterday with Doug Peterson, implying that Trevor Lawrence has an upper body, specifically a shoulder injury, that may potentially limit his participation in this game. The news initially reacted, and we saw this number jump up. Now, we've seen it come back a little bit. Got as high as 5, even some 5.5 showed on the board. We're now back to 4.5 this morning. We don't know the status of Trevor Lawrence. When you're acting on what Peterson's comments were, it said that he was sore and his goal is to be able to play on Sunday. In terms of other injuries for the Jags that I'm keeping my eye on, I'm looking at Brian Thomas Jr., who again was limited, as I'm also looking at Ezra Cleveland and Brandon Sheriff on the offensive line. Andrew Wingard, starting safety for the Jags, who's been out several weeks, is expected to make his return, so a bit of a boost for a defense that certainly needs all the help that they can get so far through 9 weeks. Have very much struggled and now have a tough matchup here against this Vikings offense, but all eyes on this game focused on Trevor Lawrence. You think about his status prior, this game was right around 4. Whether or not he's able to go is still to be determined. If he's out and it is Mac Jones or Beathard, I think you see this number certainly trend towards 7. If he's in, we might be holding steady here at 4.5 or 4 in favor of the Vikings on the road. Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at the Washington Commanders. Back and forth in this game, 2.5 to 3, 3 to 2.5, and that's where we're sitting this morning at a expensive 2.5 across the board for the Washington Commanders, minus 120 to minus 125, left to right across the screen. Pinnacle minus 114, but keep in mind they run their margins a little bit tighter, so that 114 looks a lot more like 119, and so you're not getting a big difference or necessarily a tip in that price. As you're looking at the total, 45.5 remains the number, holding steady the last 2 days. Nothing super impactful on this game from an injury standpoint that I'm keeping my eye on for the Commanders. Zach Ertz was a DNP, but that was fully a rest day. Brian Robinson was limited in practice on the Steelers side of the football. You keep getting alerts about Justin Fields and his availability to practice from some of the injury services. I don't know why that keeps happening. It's just being reported in a weird way. I think there's some fantasy tags that are screwing up some of the alert systems. But other than that, nothing super substantial on either side that you're looking at from an injury perspective. And this is a game that's just being bet both ways based on some of the opinions being shared in the market so far to date. Next game up is the Atlanta Falcons on the road at the New Orleans Saints. I thought this was interesting to see how this was bet yesterday. I was doing the live stream, talked about the Saints, and we immediately saw some Falcons money come in. And I mean, this got to 4 everywhere across the board, left to right across the screen. And we saw the total hold steady at 46.5. But as the day went on yesterday, and we got into the evening and later in the evening as well, this was a number that came back to 3.5. And the only 4 on the board this morning is showing at Circa Sports. Everywhere else back to 3.5. So the 4s didn't last. There was a buy point on Atlanta, came back almost immediately within an hour, back the other way on the dog for the Saints. I was talking with somebody internally in the group, and there was a professional bettor who's not super public facing. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to get into calling out specific names and look at specific scenarios, but as we're doing more evergreen content, we published a video around betting consensuses and some of the noise that comes with those numbers and why they're not overly reliable and sharps don't utilize them. And it went a different way, but in the editing process, it was kind of privy to a conversation, and there was the topic of reverse line movement came up. And the commentary around reverse line movement that I was trying to make was the traditional one that you get from these consensus reports, the lack of trust in sources that provide these reports and the noise that comes in with the number and not seeing the full picture. And what was interesting was a bit of a learning moment for me that I guess I thought of directly, but I think kind of applies to this game when you're looking at it. And this bettor, who's held in a very high regard across the industry, was referenced as somebody who behind the scenes said that they're very much a believer in reverse line movement, but in a different way. And while it's not relating to the consensus reports, the idea was that later in the week, as you're looking at movements, even though the number might not breach back to the point that it originated at, which I'll explain in a second, the moves that come later in the week, even if it's a smaller move, tend to be a lot more telling than the moves as a whole. And so in this game, for instance, it's very clear that Atlanta is a very popular side this week. We've seen a massive adjustment from pick to 3, look ahead to reopen. And then we have seen this week this number get pushed up from 3 to as high as 4. And all of that indication is like a lot of people are betting on Atlanta, and that's certainly true. There's a lot of respected opinions on the Falcons as well pushing this game out. But as we think about it, the last move in this game, which came at the latest point after the main moves, after the limit bump, the move back from 4.5 to 3.5, framed in the thought process of this better, the half-point move from 4 back to 3.5 that came latest in the week so far when the limits were highest, he values that half-point move as being significantly more telling than the move from pick all the way up to 4 earlier in the week and on the adjustment. And so I don't know why that necessarily came to my mind. I think it's relevant to this game so far, but a very interesting way to look at NFL markets and NFL betting on sides specifically is when you see those half-point moves that come later after the initial move. That tends to be a lot more telling than the moves prior. Something to think about. This audience that listens to the podcast is a very wide range of folks. For some people, this will not be news. For others, looking at this in a different perspective might be a little bit telling in that regard and something that might be picked up new. But I was listening to the call as we were discussing it yesterday and going through some ideas, and that came up. I thought it was relevant to this game that I would share, as it was not a topic that I have heard bettors at this level ever discuss. And when you hear they're valuing something like that, looking at things in the NFL specifically, I thought that was an interesting note to share on this game. Denver on the road at the Kansas City Chiefs. Very little movement on this game. Still holding steady at 8, still holding steady at 41.5 is the total. Not much to say here as you look at this number and the way that it's trending and the way that the Chiefs have been playing. I discussed it on the preview yesterday, and I was like, I could see this getting from 8 to 7.5, but to me, this number is kind of locked in based on recent closers and what we're looking at, and it's right. But the handicap, when you lay it out for both sides, a little bit more compelling for the Denver Broncos, and so I could see some of these 8s turning into 7.5s the way the market's leaning a little bit right now. I have a hard time seeing it move much further than that, especially down in the direction of the Denver Broncos. San Francisco on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. On the show yesterday, gave out 5 on the 49ers. That was the bottom of the market, and we're seeing this back all the way up to 6 and even 6.5 this morning at Pinnacle, as the 49ers have been bet in the last about 16 hours. Rationale here is pretty clear. Christian McCaffrey experienced no pain. There was a video of him on Twitter. It wasn't very dynamic in terms of what he was doing, but he looked fast. He looked explosive. Jennings is back at practice on a limited basis. Debo is back at practice on a limited basis. And then for the Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield, a DNP with the toe. It's a short week. It won't likely keep him out of this game. I'm not expecting that. But you have the toe injury, not practicing. So it's a week of disrupted prep on the short week. And also, you see Jalen McMillan again, a DNP at practice as well with Shepard. And so there is some limitations on the offense for the Buccaneers playing on the short week while the Niners out of the bye seemingly getting a lot of support back. So now it's back to 6.5, which is where we opened at some books. And I think that is a much better number than the 5 that we were at when we were doing the live stream yesterday. Pats on the road at Chicago. This is still Chicago 6 across the board. There was some over money that came in around 12:31 p.m. Pacific time yesterday that pushed this total up. Now as high as 38.5, even touched 39 at a couple of shops. When I look at Chicago, injury concern kind of all over the place. In the secondary, you're still uncertain about the status of Kyler Gordon. He was limited in practice yesterday with a hamstring injury. Jalen Jones with the shoulder is still a DNP. Jaquan Brisker already ruled out for the game in this spot. Andrew Billings, defensive tackle, tears his pec. He's going to be out for some time as well. Offensive line, Darnell Wright, Ryan Bates, Tevin Jenkins, all banged up and dealing with injuries, as are Braxton Jones, who was a DNP along with Wright. So you still have the issues on the bookends of tackles, as well as Montez Sweat on the defensive side, a little bit banged up as well. So there's a ton of injuries for Chicago, ton of uncertainties for Chicago as well. Same names and faces that we've seen on the defensive side for New England, banged up for the last couple of weeks. No major changes there. Justification that I could see for the over is you're thinking about what Drake May is presenting as a quarterback for the Pats and his willingness to push it downfield against the banged up secondary. And then the Pats defense that absolutely cannot stop the run. And you would think Chicago here, even if they get a little bit of help on the offensive line and they're still maybe down a guy or two, they're going to be able to run the football, which definitely opens up this offense. I just have so many questions about what we're getting effort-wise from Chicago on both sides of the football. Tennessee Titans on the road at the LA Chargers. We're at a soft 7.5 across the board for the LA Chargers. Total up to 39. Chargers overs have been kind of the thorn in my side the last couple of weeks. Don't have an opinion here, but it is interesting to me to see the total get bet up. Makes a lot of sense with how much the Chargers are throwing the football. When I look at the Tennessee Titans, I'm intrigued to see if they get bet as a dog. A little bit of a concern for me would be that Levis and Rudolph are splitting reps. There's a plan to get Rudolph more ramped up at practice to get ramped up and take more reps at practice to eventually overtake the starting job from Mason Rudolph. Doesn't seem like that is going to be this week, but likely next week for the Titans. Tony Pollard's having his reps managed. And still on the defensive side, Snead not back in practice yet. Diggs placed on IR earlier this week, as well as Amani Hooker, the other starting safety, limited with a groin injury. So defensive issues for the Titans perhaps contributing to this over, along with the Chargers' increased pass rate over expectation. Philadelphia on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. For Dallas, it looks like Dak could have suffered a season-ending injury as the hamstring tears off of the bone. A pretty gruesome sight to think about. That looks like an injury that's going to keep him out. Again, extended time potentially for the remainder of the season. CeeDee Lamb, incredibly tough. He is expected to give it a chance to play on Sunday. That would be a boost for the offense, certainly. Still don't know what we're getting from Micah Parsons, who was limited. Deron Bland was a DNP on Wednesday. Diggs was limited as well in participation, so still some question marks about the Cowboys on defense. For the Eagles, the good news is that Dallas Goedert will return for this week. He was a full participant in practice and said he is tracking to play. More good news was that A.J. Brown was a limited participant at practice yesterday, and so that is a good sign coming off of the knee injury. The concerning part for the Philadelphia Eagles, Devontae Smith dealing with a hamstring injury, a DNP, and a no-show at practice yesterday. That pops up out of nowhere. There wasn't any report to downplay it either. Well, that looks like a concerning sign. Jalen Hurts did not practice yesterday. He came out later and said that it was a rest day. Initially, there was a video posted, and it was him talking with Sirianni, and it was implied that he had an injury that he was talking with Sirianni about. Later reports from him don't necessarily agree with that. I'm looking at this as just a rest day, and I'm buying into that side at the moment. We'll see if that changes a little bit later today, but could be potentially a blow with Smith missing instead of Brown missing, which would be a bit of a 180 from where we were looking. But there's also definitely a chance that both of those guys are still out there on Sunday. We'll see what the injury report holds for the Eagles. As we see the total yesterday as well, got down to as low as 41.5 at some books. We're now back up to 43 as there was a wave of over money yesterday later in the afternoon. Remember, this was as high as 48 on the look ahead before the Prescott injury and before both sides experienced some injuries to skill players as well. And so we're not going to obviously trend back up to 48, but this could definitely get back to the key of 44. New York Jets on the road at the Arizona Cardinals. This is anywhere between Jets -1 at Pinnacle, and FanDuel is up to 1.5, along with DK and Bet Online. We're seeing Pick'em -105 at Chris, Circa, and Buckeye. In terms of the Jets' injury, Aaron Rodgers was a full participant, his first full Wednesday practice in quite some time. Bevy of injuries on the offensive line: Smith, Simpson, Veritucca, Morgan Moses, all banged up and dealing with injuries. Moses expected to play, according to Jeff Ulbrich, which would be a big name to have at right tackle for this game specifically. I believe Tyron Smith was just a rest day. I'm not looking at that one too seriously. But when it comes to Simpson and Veritucca, groin and an ankle injury, those could be potentially injuries. As I'm looking at the defensive side, Tony Adams and Ashton Davis, two key safeties, both participating in practice as well. Adams was full. Have to keep an eye on Michael Carter in the slot, see if he's able to go, as he's been dealing with a back injury for the seemingly last few weeks. trying to play through that spot, but he would be big to have back in addition to those other two corners. James Conner was limited in practice, not too concerned about his status for Sunday. Sean Murphy-Bunting was back in a full participant role, which is a bit of a boost for that secondary as well. I would think the Jets take a little bit of more money between now and Sunday, certainly a side that I like going into the games on Sunday as well. Detroit on the road at the Houston Texans. We know a little bit more about Zadarius Smith. He is not going to be in the building for the Lions until Friday, as he was given a couple of days off. I don't know what that says about his status for the game on Sunday, so I'm curious to see if there's more commentary about that a little bit later today. I'm also curious to see if there's more commentary about what in the world we're expecting from Nico Collins. Everything was ramping up to say that he is going to be back this week. Potentially, it's a bit of gamesmanship being played, but also there could potentially be a bit of noise in this as well, as he's cleared every test, according to a source, that would require him passing to get back on the field. So you would think that he could potentially be back, should be back. There was a report last week that he was running at 20 mile per hour in practice, which would be back to speed. But D'Amico Ryans is still saying he's doing well, but yet to be seen where he is in regard to return to practice. I have a hard time imagining that they would get him back on the field unless he logs a full practice at some point this week. Perhaps that is today, perhaps that is tomorrow. Concerning at the least to see him not back in any fashion yesterday. So have to keep an eye on that. And Will Anderson was a DNP, still dealing with the ankle injury. So it's not like the Texans are getting the injury bump news that was expected. If both of those guys do not play, and Smith, even though he's not there in the building until Friday, is active and playing on Sunday, I would think this gets a touch higher than 3.5 between now and Sunday. And so this is a game I'm certainly keen on keeping my eye out for the injury news that we might get in it. Miami on the road at the Los Angeles Rams. This is now Rams -1 across the board, with a total of 50 from left to right across the screen for the Miami Dolphins. Injury-wise, nothing too new or different that I think would change the opinion. Still looking at a couple of names banged up on the defensive side. For the LA Rams, the big news of the week was obviously losing another offensive lineman. It's been a season full of banged up old linemen that we are looking at and watching, and they are down yet another starter. And so from the Dolphins side, curious to see what we get from Seiler and if he's able to play between the orbital bone fracture. Curious to see what we see from Javon Holland in the first practice report later today. Also curious to see what we see from the starting nickel corner position. And from the Rams, just curious if we have any changes in addition to what we heard earlier in the week on the offensive line, for any names that might be shuffling around and how they are going to handle that situation. But the first practice report for both teams of the week will be out a little bit later today. All right, that will do it for me today. Again, if you haven't seen the full Week 10 live stream preview, you can head over to the RAS Picks YouTube channel and watch that in the drop-down. I will be updating it with any bets or props that are added between now and Sunday. That's in the pinned comment below the video, so you can scroll down and watch that, and you can keep an eye on that throughout the week. If you're already watching on YouTube, would love it if you give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. If you're listening this morning on Apple or Spotify and you have a second to leave a review on either Apple or Spotify, just down below, pause the podcast, scroll down. There'll be an option for you to rate and review the podcast. Everything helps with the show, and so if you're finding the information valuable and it's keeping you up to date with everything that's going on each morning, would love to have your support in keeping the pod moving up the charts. That'll do it for me today. Have a fantastic Thursday, everybody, and I'll chat with you bright and early again tomorrow morning.